that we push the approval of these until our next meeting.
Yeah.
That's a substantial portion. Okay, everyone okay with that?
Yeah.
Now, it's time for anyone on the council who has a comment about something that's not on the agenda. Now's the time to do it. I do ask you to keep it brief. You know, we're gonna keep on time kind of thing. Anyone? Betsy?
Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., we'll be doing a town cleanup in the town of Burnville. All volunteers are welcome to participate. We anticipated going from 9 to 11, 9 to maybe 11:30. It's a joint project between the Russian River Pride Committee and the MAC Cleanup Committee and River Keeper.
That's
Oh, it's on
because
the
it's
agenda?
part of our.
Oh, I see.
The trash.
Well, I'm the chair of the trash committee for the Pride Committee, so I have to say something.
And you said it very well.
And why don't, I mean, while you're on Pride Month, I mean, it's a big deal that it's back. Why don't you,
There are events happening all weekend for many of them are family friendly. The Russian River Health Center is doing a wellness fair on Saturday, most of the day. At the end of the day, they're doing a panel discussion of the history of the AIDS epidemic and how it hit Burnville so hard. I'm also on that panel, because I founded a local organization and stuff. And the parade is happening at noon. I think lineup is at 11. The parade is at noon. We expect it to last about an hour, followed by a dance and celebration at Johnson's Beach. Again, at the end of the celebration at Johnson's Beach, the cleanup committee crew will be, all volunteers are, well, all hands on deck for that, because we have an hour and a half of play. I would look at the Russian River Alliance website for all the event information. There are numerous things happening. There's a senior brunch happening on Saturday morning. Tomorrow afternoon, there will be Equity Wine is doing an event.
that's Saturday.
No,
Saturday?
No, Saturday.
I thought they were doing an opening event tomorrow afternoon.
That's why
Like a
we're saying
reception.
first thing Friday.
Oh, Friday. No?
Tomorrow's Friday, yeah.
Yeah, no, I thought Equity was doing something
You
on
mean
Friday.
equality wine?
Equality wine, sorry,
yeah.
Equality wine. And there's just, I can't even delineate all the events that are happening.
And
There's a
I
clean and sober event as well.
And I hear there's a history of the pride flag
Yes,
installation that has just gone up this afternoon.
Yes.
I hear it is fabulous.
it's called the flag and the map.
Flag
And
in the map.
it represents a flag, a rainbow flag in places that you would least expect it, all over the world.
And that's it all the galleries.
Yeah.
Okay,
Can anybody you gonna bring up the town hall? or-
No. Sure, October 26th, there'll be a town hall at the Forestville Elementary School. They're a multi-purpose room.
Can you speak up? The interpreters can't hear.
Yes,
Everywhere.
Thursday, 2 weeks from tonight, October 26th, at the Forestville Elementary School, there will be a Forestville Town Hall meeting from 5:30 to 7:30. And the issues are going to be revisiting the housing element and hearing from a couple of affordable housing advocates, as well as hearing from the local community groups, update on site crosswalks and sidewalks, and an opportunity to again comment on the asphalt plant proposal.
anyone else?
Oh, the elections. Is that on the agenda? I can't remember.
It's not on the agenda.
It's not on the agenda. Okay, so the elections are coming up and
And
it's in there. So thank you for participating. How's that? Everybody vote, please. Linda will cover it.
Anyone else? All right, we're gonna move on to county report. Supervisor Hopkins.
All right, is that working? Hopefully people on Zoom can hear me. Great. All right, Tracy says yes. Wonderful. So I'm going to start with some roads updates and some good news. So Moscow Road, the repairs to the newest slide area on the east end of Moscow Road are almost complete. There is still a little bit of finishing work to be done, but the substantial bulk of the work has been completed and the road is open and in use. The original larger slide location, which is the west end location towards Duncan's Mills, is still in progress, but it is on schedule to be completed by the end of the year. That is weather and conditions permitting, knock on wood. We really hope that we don't get some crazy weather before the end of the year. If you came sort of the back way through Occidental, you would have noticed that the Monterey Main Street Bridge over Dutchbill Creek does have the traffic signal operational. And, it's a little bit unusual, right? Because you have to kind of go all the way through. Like if you're coming from the Bartlett side of things, there's not kind of a second, light for you there. But I think that people are figuring it out. I think that it is pretty intuitive, even if it's not your standard traffic signal. And so now there is no longer a need to detour along Fur Road, although that is still an option if folks want to do that. Bridge debris removal work will be proceeding this fall on that bridge, which in case anyone missed the great photos on social media, there were sort of large trees wedged in that kind of broke some of the pilings there sticking into the river. So it's going to begin this fall, but unfortunately we don't have the permits yet for the in-stream work that's required for the full repair. So that's a whole process that we have to go through, and we're hoping to have those permits by spring so that we can then start when we're allowed to, which will probably be determined by coho spawning and river flows and things like that. Next up, Neely Road and Vacation Bridge. The Vacation Bridge seasonal crossing is scheduled to be removed October 11th, 10th. I haven't sort of checked in on that to figure out where we are, if that did it happen. It was blocked this morning. Okay, so that work is underway, it sounds like. And so, thank you. I'm going to pause, catch up. And so Neely Road construction is planned to be substantially done before the bridge removal, and there are no closures scheduled after that date that would impede evacuation routes. Walking path, actually want to give a shout out to MAC Representative Patty Thayer, tabling at a community event in May, who heard from parents that the walking path that's just up the road from Monterey School, which connects Foothill Drive with Hill Street and the neighborhood, was inaccessible to strollers and wagons. And that was forcing people to then walk along 116, which, as we know, is not very safe. So Sonoma County Public Infrastructure, with the sort of advocacy from our MAC rep, was able to do some work, vegetation removal, modifications to the gate, and so access is improved for students and families using that walking path. I also want to give a little plug and ask a question. Who here has actually gone and hiked up in Monterey Redwoods, the new regional park in the Lower Russian River? Highly, highly recommend if you haven't. I finally got out there and did it myself a month or two ago, and it is really beautiful. There hasn't been any big master plan process with that park yet, but what we are doing is utilizing existing, mostly sort of old logging roads and former trails, and then just trying to shore them up to make them even better and sort of less erosion potential and things like that with the rain. So they've done an amazing job within the existing framework, and I really would encourage folks to go out there. Really beautiful views of different types of forests, and a really lovely walk. Governance study update. We will be sending out a final draft of the governance study for community input. We expect to have that out in about 2 or 3 weeks. And then we actually want to give folks a long time to review it. So we will not have a large meeting until January 20th. It's currently sort of scheduled for January 20th at 10:30 a.m. So that'll give folks plenty of time over the holidays. Do your reading with the governance study, think about what you want to advocate for, and then go forward from there. In between releasing it and the big meeting, we're open to invitations from groups or neighborhoods who would like to have small group discussions, and we're open to that anytime. One of these will be a Spanish language meeting on November 4th from 10:30 to 12. So Spanish language meeting, November 4th, 10:30 to 12. The big community meeting will be January 20th at 10:30 a.m. And now, as Vesta was mentioning, we do have our MAC selection process and ballots underway. So we have 3 applicants for 2 open seats in Forestville, 1 representative and 1 alternate. I am sort of heartbroken to say that our founding members, Vesta Copastakes and Lucy Hardcastle, are preparing to retire, but very, very grateful for their tremendous service. And I'm sure we'll talk about this and have a formal acknowledgement later. There are also 3 applicants for 1 representative seat in Guerneville, which is Nick Pereira's seat. And there are flyers and ballots at the sign-in table, and the information is also available on the LRRMAC webpage. So there's multiple ways to submit your ballot. You can do that by email, by snail mail, and in person at Coffee Bazaar in Guerneville, and get your caffeine fix at the same time in the morning on October 27th, and at Brew in Forestville in the afternoon on that same day. So trying to make that connection with some awesome local businesses. I swear I've got just a couple more things and then we'll move forward. I know everyone's excited for the PG&E update. So vacation rental information workshops. We have one coming up on the 19th at the Monterey Community Center and one coming up on the 25th at Guerneville School. Both this month in October. We just had one at Forestville. Good turnout. I thought a really productive meeting. A lot of really interesting questions and issues that were raised from folks. And so the meetings have kind of 2 purposes. One is to explain what the current status of regulation is, which is kind of confusing. And so being able to answer people's questions about that, to explain our current enforcement hotline, and then also to solicit feedback on what's not right about the current ordinance. And even though we won't be able to move forward with an amendment to the current ordinance right away, we're planning on using all of that feedback to go into our general plan update process. So the general plan update process will kick off at the Board of Supervisors this December, and we'll start to have more community meetings next year. But so if you have thoughts, feelings, ideas about vacation rentals, please consider joining us on the 19th at Monterey Community Center or the 25th at Guerneville School. Finally, another opportunity for participation. One of our big pushes in the 5th District office is to really focus on human-powered modes of travel. So making it safer for people to be able to walk to school, or even in a downtown that might not have sidewalks, as we have many downtowns like that in West County. And so currently the Sonoma County Transportation Authority is creating the Sonoma County ATP, or Active Transportation Plan. And so we basically are trying to get your input to identify needs in your community. Do you want a crosswalk here? Do you want a speed bump here? Do you want a speed limit lowered over here? These kinds of options for traffic calming, or do you need a new bike lane? Those kinds of things can be addressed through this process. And actually, if you go on the website, you can literally put a pin on a map on where you want your crosswalk or your stop sign or whatever else it is that you think that you need for your community. And so you can also, there's a little survey that also tells you asks you generally what you would like to see in all of our communities. In addition to that local process, which is the Sonoma County Transportation Authority, we also have Caltrans Bay Area kicking off and updating their bike plan. So the bike plan is going to identify barriers to cycling, prioritize improvements, and also act as a resource for Caltrans staff to implement bike infrastructure in the 9-county Bay Area. And so obviously we have 116 going through our towns in the Lower Russian River, and if there are improvements needed there, this is a great opportunity to engage. And so, yeah, please let us know what you think in terms of crosswalks, bike and pedestrian projects by using that Sonoma County Transportation Authority survey. You can also email us, and this also will be under consideration with our infrastructure ad hoc committee to talk about the community infrastructure funds, of which we have roughly $5 million to make improvements in Western Sonoma County. And so crosswalk projects could be eligible for that. Also could be potentially within the existing transportation, public works, public infrastructure budget. So, so that is my update. I think I covered everything.
Thank you.
let's hold for any questions or comments they have for Supervisor Hopkins. Hold a second. Are you ready? Okay, we're good.
I just wondered on the crosswalks and all that, so that does not include any road improvements, correct? Like paving and, I mean, even for safety reasons. Oh, thank
I'm gonna
you.
just come join you awkwardly.
I'm getting
the
a crick in my neck. So-
You guys have to get a higher chiropractor for the MAC meetings. That's a really great question. It's not intended for that, but I would actually say go for that.
Okay.
If there's a pin in a road that is so severely degraded that it's a barrier to cycling, put that pin on that
that's
map
what I
and write that, because the nice thing is you put the pin in the map, but then there's a whole box for comments, and people are actually writing really thoughtful, multiple paragraphs about what is needed in this area to improve safety. So if it is pavement, maybe it's pavement plus a bike lane or pavement plus a crosswalk, please. I think that's a great way of collecting that data.
Thank you.
Is this the opportunity to get a crosswalk from the Monterey, the Mirabel Park and Ride to the Riverside, River Road to downtown, to Steelhead Beach? Because we've said that it's like, give it up, it's gonna be decades, but this sounds like it would be an opportunity to get that crosswalk and that walking path to Steelhead Beach, which is so essential for public safety all summer long.
That's a great question. I would have to check with, so first of all, please put that on the SCTA map, because that could potentially be identified as a, regional wide, project. I don't know about the community infrastructure funds, because I don't know how expensive that is. And so, when you have $5 million for all of West County, that might potentially, because costs are insane, be a multi-million-dollar project. If there are issues with site distance and tree removal that needs to occur. So I would definitely say add that to the SCTA, ATP, I feel like we're in acronym hell here, active transportation plan, survey. I think that's a really great idea.
Do you think that the death of the young man on River Road would inspire that perhaps a little higher level of possibilities?
Yeah, we've had conversations with Sonoma County Public Infrastructure specifically about that fatality and how we can more broadly calm traffic in that whole area. And so would love to talk to you and follow up on that one.
It's
for sure.
As you know, it's like a repeat.
It's so horrifying. It's so sad. And I'm honestly surprised that there aren't more fatalities. Just when I see how fast people are going, how close they are to the pedestrians, and how many people walk along that stretch of road with
their
giant
floaters.
floaty things
Yeah.
that then are
They're
being
kids.
caught by wind, and kids
Yeah.
and strollers and wagons.
Yeah, it's gotta be fixed, so maybe this is an opportunity.
Yeah, they might have had a few too on the way back.
They drink-
So then
they drink
people are not
before they
necessarily
get to
walking
bed.
in a straight
Yeah, right.
line.
They drink before they get to the beach because there's a no alcohol rule. So it does get very interesting watching people with their floaters and their kids and their coolers walking down the river road. Thank you.
I'm wondering about infrastructure. Does this include at all, like programs? And I'm just thinking lately, since I have become more familiar with what it's like to be without a car and somewhat disabled, it's really impossible. And West County Community Services has a wonderful program, as does Sebastopol, where drivers will take you places. But West County Community Services only has one driver, and Sebastopol has something like either 23 or 28. And I'm the one driver gets paid something somehow, but I'm just wondering if any of this money could go toward augmenting services like that, because we don't have a lot of buses, and I live a little over a mile from a bus stop, and so I couldn't get to it anyway. So I've come to realize what a need it is.
No, I really appreciate you sharing your experience, and I completely agree. And one of the most challenging things is that there actually are programs available for folks who qualify for services, but they have to be within a certain distance of a bus stop. And we don't have hardly any bus stops. So it's like the areas that are already disadvantaged by not having transit get more disadvantaged by not having access to paratransit.
Exactly.
To answer your question about eligibility, we got sort of two separate pots of money. One last year was $2 million of community infrastructure funds, and the one this year was $4 million of community infrastructure funds. We've spent down some of that first tranche, and so that's why I say it's about 5 million. The first tranche, those kinds of programs would be eligible. The second tranche, the CAO's office kind of tightened the requirements on it and required that it go through a particular department, primarily regional parks or Sonoma County Public Infrastructure, so that it wasn't quite as much of an administrative burden, because of course we came in with all of these creative ideas that they weren't really thinking about when they had envisioned the first $2 million. And so we were kind of, drawn in a little bit of boundaries, but there is still that possibility. And I would also mention that we are accepting applications for tourism impact funds, and that's great for programmatic services. So if we could get more stipends for more drivers, that could potentially be a really positive investment. Yeah.
Thank you.
I've got a question. And when you're talking about pots of money, there was money allocated from quarry mitigation funds for the crosswalk sidewalks lighting in downtown Forestville. And so I'm thinking, what do I tell my constituents that there's this big pot of money for the county, and yet we have to use this money. Everybody else is getting projects and sidewalks. What do I say about that? I know that money's been allocated for a couple of years.
Yeah. So do you want an update on the sidewalk timing, or?
No, I know there's a pause on that.
Okay, yeah.
Because of the sewer stuff.
Mm-hmm. So more just you would also, Forestville would also be eligible as a community for community infrastructure funds. I would not see the quarry mitigation funds. I mean, that's its own thing that's, really important to move forward as it was originally intended like 20 years ago, or however many decades it was when that money was set aside. So if there are needed projects in Forestville that are not being addressed by the quarry mitigation funds, would definitely encourage an application. One thing we've also thought is if there is a need for matching funds for potential matching grant for the skate park that Jackie's been working on, that could be a potential use. If there are improvements needed to Forestville Youth Park, or if FPA wants to work on further development of the downtown square. But first, we're going to create the committee on the infrastructure funds to find out the priorities, and then we'll work within that framework with each town to try to identify their preferred project and move it forward. Grayton, by the way, they don't have a MAC, so their CSD is talking about a downtown plaza, because there is a lot that's for sale, and the CSD might sort of take that on. There's a lot of interest in community spaces right now. A lot of conversations happening in Guerneville about having some kind of local oriented downtown park. And I keep hearing that in pretty much I think after the pandemic, where we were all so far apart, and everyone's like, I want a place I can gather in town with other people, other humans. So.
Thank you.
Anyone seen that?
Just, I wanted the Neely Road thing. It looks like all they have left, just so everyone hears this, is edge work. And they haven't finished the water main access points, but pretty much. Great. That's a good update. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anyone in the audience have any questions for Supervisor Hopkins? I don't see any hands raised here. Do we have any on Zoom?
If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand and I will unmute you. I'm not seeing any hands.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor Hopkins. We are going to move on to our discussion with PG&E. Then we will bring it to the council for questions, and we'll go to the audience, and we will play it by ear on the, like Supervisor Hopkins walked up here, and we'll see how Debbie's doing between the back and forth in terms of where you have to stand.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Supervisor Hopkins. Thank you, committee members, for allowing us to come and speak tonight and meet with you. And yes, we definitely appreciate this opportunity to come and speak about our work here in West County. My name is Melinda Rivera. I work in local government affairs for PG&E. My service territory is Lake County and Sonoma County. I'm joined by our regional vice president, Dave Canny. He will be providing the majority of the presentation. We have a few slides that we'd like to share with you. Some of the slides on vegetation management will also be presented by my colleague, David Wentworth. He is a member of our local leadership team for vegetation management in the Sonoma division. So he'll be here to answer questions as well. We're also joined tonight by our superintendent of electric field operations. His name is Joe Horak. He lives here in West County, so he'll be here as well. And then all of us will be, once the meeting has ended, we'll be here in the moment to answer questions from the committee. And then if anyone has questions for us afterwards, we'll stay until the meeting's over. We have some poster boards in the back. They're from the slide presentation, but these have some more detail. So we figure people might want to go up and kind of look at them. So we'll be here in the back and we'll be available to answer any questions that anyone might have in the audience, or take down people's information. If you have specific information about, or specific questions about your property or your account or your service or programs that you might be eligible for, we're happy to take down your specific information. Then we can go back and follow up with you if you have questions. So, but thank you again for your time, and I'll turn it over now to our regional vice president.
Excellent. Thank you, Melinda. Good evening, Supervisor Hopkins, committee members, members of the public here in the room and on the Zoom. Really appreciate the opportunity to visit with you this evening. As Melinda mentioned, we do have some content that we'll be going through that we understand will be largely responsive to the interests of the committee members and members of the public. Happy to take questions, beyond the scope of what we've brought here. We're really here to engage with you, collaborate with you, understand where we may be falling short and where we can do better. We're here to share some of the areas that we're focused on improving. We like to start all of our meetings with safety. I won't drain this slide, but we're really focused on preparedness tips and partnering with communities, both public safety and members of the public, to ensure that we're all prepared in the event of a disaster. And the Safety Action Center at pge.com is a great place for more resources if you're not already familiar with it. By way of brief introduction, I've actually been in this current role for, I think this is week 3 for me. But I've been with PG&E since 2006 in a variety of roles, many of those in the customer part of our organization. You heard Melinda reference our local leadership teams. Actually going back about 5, 6, 7 years, we established these cross-functional leadership teams with members of our local gas and electric operations, and all of the support functions to ensure that we were being responsive to the needs of the community and proactively planning together to show up better in the community. And I had a role covering Marin, Napa, and Sonoma back in 2017. This time that year, I spent most of my time in October, early November, in the surrounding community, and also in our staging yard in response to the 2017 wildfires. So being better in the space of wildfire mitigation is very personal to me. It's very personal to members of our team and those of our coworkers who live and work in this area. My name's Dave. David will also be up here in a moment, as Melinda mentioned. Joe Horak, John Leba on my team, and Scott Warner as well, who's also on the local team. So we look forward to answering any of and all of your questions, and we'll be here until we answer them or take them away and come back with some more detail. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit, sort of set the stage relative to wildfire risk and what we're doing with our community wildfire safety program, how we're approaching that evolving threat. Then I'll hand it over to David to talk about vegetation management. Supervisor Hopkins mentioned a lot of acronyms. We use a lot of acronyms. I will try not to use any. Enhanced Power Line Safety Settings, or EPSS, is one of those, but I'll endeavor to not use acronyms to the extent possible. Please raise your hand if I start getting acronym soupy on you. Talk about reliability in the area, some of what we've seen, some of what we've done, and then share some customer resources that are available for customers to support energy resiliency, and then happy to take Q&A. Next slide. So this first slide that we'll move to it is a bit of a context setting. So going back to 2020 into 2021 and then 2022, of course, we're familiar, we were in the midst of a historic drought, which we are fortunately now out of. One of the things we know in California, though, is that we go into this cycle. So hopefully we have a wetter period, summer comes around again, and then we will be back into drought. So it's important that we kind of evolve our response to wildfire risk and our prevention of wildfires, and our, playing our part as part of that. So here's an acronym, EPSS, that's Enhanced Power Line Safety Settings. I'll go into greater detail about that in a moment. That was actually initially born in late July of 2021 on the heels of the Dixie Fire in response to this significant extended drought we were seeing. And we've now expanded and evolved that program to be smarter and better and still prevent wildfires. And we'll talk about that in greater detail. One more thing I want to cover before we move to the next slide is that historically in California, the most significant catastrophic wildfire risk we saw was associated with dry offshore wind events, Diablo wind events, and typically the peak risk period, September, October. What we started to see in the height of the drought was a significant number of acres burned, fires starting on non-windy days. So where public safety power shutoff, or PSPS, is very effective, albeit very impactful from a customer perspective during those conditions, we were starting to see many other days of year increased wildfire risk and significant growing and larger catastrophic fires that would occur on days that were not windy. And so again, going back to EPSS, that's where that was born, and that's why that tool is in place. Let's go to the next slide. So as this threat evolves, we are taking a multi-layered approach to protection. Together, these layers of protection since 2017 have reduced wildfire risk by 90%. We're looking to go beyond that. I'm sure you're all familiar with our undergrounding plan, our very aggressive plan, 10,000 miles of power lines throughout our service area. That's distribution, primary distribution throughout the service area. We have about 25,500 miles of primary overhead distribution. So it's a significant portion, but it's still less than 50%. And so we need a solution as well for the other 60 or so percent. That includes things like PSPS and EPSS, again, public safety power shutoff and enhanced power line safety settings, as well as overhead hardening, so stronger poles and power lines. Our vegetation management program, which we'll talk about here in just a moment, and continuing to look at new tools and technologies associated with things like undergrounding so that we can do that more effectively and efficiently, things like EPSS, and then things like early fault detection or distribution fault anticipation so that we can prevent outages before they occur. Let's move to the next slide. So just a quick orientation here to the lower Russian River area. Couple things to highlight. So the dark orange is high fire risk area, so much of this area. And then to the very southeastern corner, that's what we refer to as the EPSS buffer area, or an adjacent area that we are able to protect during particular conditions with EPSS. The light blue areas are areas where we still have vegetation management work to come. And again, Dave will go into this in greater detail. The darker areas are where we've completed vegetation work this year. So just some context relative to where we've been this year, where we're going. And this is a continuous cycle, of course, because vegetation, as we all know, grows. Also, a couple things, the light green icon there, the circle with the power line in there, or the power pole, that's overhead system hardening completed. And then the other icon indicates overhead system hardening that's still to come. And then another item I want to highlight is this purple sectionalizing device installed. You'll see a cluster of those on the southeastern side and one to the north there, north of Guerneville. The sectionalizing devices, I'll go into greater detail when we talk about EPSS. These are devices that are installed on the distribution system that allow us to chop the distribution system up into smaller chunks. The reason that's important is that if a fault occurs, tree falls, downstream or load side of that device, then we protect that area, but other customers upstream near the substation are able to be stay in light. So it's a way to kind of break up the distribution system into smaller pieces so that we can protect where we need to and then keep customers in lights where we need to. And we have clearly we've done some work here. There's existing infrastructure, and then we have more to come, more planned that we'll talk about later. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to David, and then I'll come back and talk some more, and then we'll take some questions.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Yeah, so just quick introduction again. I'm David Wentworth. I'm one of the vegetation program managers here in Sonoma. Been doing this for about the past couple of years, so gotten to know the area pretty well. So yeah, we just wanted to take a moment to just outline a little bit of what we do, both just system-wide and within the area as well. So obviously, we have a lot of trees around the power lines, and when they grow in too close, if they fall into them, they can cause outages, they can cause fires, and they can cause a lot of hazardous situations. So every year, system-wide, we inspect over 100,000 miles of power lines. We trim and fell more than 1 million trees and address dead, dying, and all sorts of different hazardous situations with these trees. And so main point of this being, we're trying to reduce wildfire risk through additional vegetation work. Many of you may be familiar with the Enhanced Vegetation Management program we were running the past few years. We have been in the process of sunsetting that program and in the process of replacing it with what we're calling, and I apologize if I mess this up, the Vegetation Management. I will come back to that. But in any case, it has to do with those enhanced power line safety shutoffs. And it's a goal to focus our focus towards those outages and to basically look at those outages, what's causing those outages, and to see if there are any more situations along those spans of lines that are similar to what caused that. And so in doing this, we can direct our focus rather than trying to expand it over a very broad sense that almost causes us to take out too many trees. And so in doing that, of course, we're reviewing and felling trees identified through previous efforts. We have inspectors that go out beforehand. And like I said, we're trying to focus that a little more directed rather than being general and broad. We're using those enhanced power safety shutoffs and then just trimming additional trees near circuits with high volumes of outages. So I guess I'm kind of repeating myself there, so we can move on. And so you already saw this on the other map, a little bit of additional context at the bottom there. It's a little small, so I'll kind of elaborate on that. But over the year of 2023 here, we have trimmed a little under 1,500 trees and felled almost 400 trees in the lower Russian River area. We still have a little bit of work, which is outlined there in the light blue. So still got a little bit more to do, but gives you a sense of we are trimming quite a few trees out in this area. It's very dense. We have a lot of very large trees that overhang the lines. And so it's a lot of work that we do have to perform along these power lines. And we can go on. Yeah. And so what to expect is essentially our inspectors go out beforehand. They inspect our power lines. They typically send out notifications in advance to the homeowners to let them know of any work that is identified. The next step of the process is we're sending out tree crews to trim or fell trees. Chipping and hauling away, we chip and haul away all small debris where possible. Sometimes if it's way off the road, there's no possible way to bring it up. We will perform a lop and scatter, which is the safest way to typically leave debris so that is not a fire hazard. And placing large wood in safe locations where possible. And alongside of that, we've been expanding upon our quality checks as well. So we have a variety of quality programs that come in behind us and just perform checks on our inspections and our tree work, and then send us their findings, and we will follow up on those as well. So we're expanding on that and trying to improve there because, as all of you, I'm sure, are aware, sometimes it's just not there, and we need to improve upon that. And so we do have a few community resources specifically for vegetation. So you can visit us online at pgne.com/trees. We do have a hotline for PG&E for vegetation as well, the 1-800-564-5080. And you can also email us at treesafety@pgne.com. And then we also have this new PG&E Report It app that you can download onto your phones, and actually you can report any sort of safety concerns that you observe while you're out and about, and we'll actually receive that now and be able to address it then. All right, and I believe I'm handing it back to Dave. Thank you all.
Thanks, David. That reported app, if you're not familiar with it, available to any of our customers in high fire threat areas, most of this area, and it's not just for veg. You can report anything that you see that's of a concern, and we both follow up on the issue and then with you as well. So I encourage you to download that and use it. So enhanced power line safety settings is the program that we've been that I've referenced. David touched on. The program he was referencing, Vegetation Management for Operational Mitigation, VMOM. We live in acronyms so much we sometimes forget what they stand for. That is a program that's really targeted at mitigating this kind of issue that we're seeing here, both proactively in areas where we've seen higher volume of outages, historically vegetation caused outages, and then reactively whenever we have a vegetation caused outage on an EPSS enabled circuit. David and team respond to that very quickly, and then do both mitigate, of course, the immediate hazard, but then also do an inspection 5 spans up and down to ensure that there aren't any other issues, imminent concerns, and take care of those. Again, that focus is really beyond the scope of our compliance program. So let me go into a little bit more detail about how EPSS works. On the left, on the pole here, there's a cartoon example of what we refer to as a line recloser. A basic distribution system comes from a substation where transmission feeds into it and then out into the community. And there's protection on that like there is in your home. There's a circuit breaker in the substation, and there are typically line reclosers out on the line. And then there's another gang tripping device that we refer to as a fuse saver. A traditional distribution system also, like ours throughout the country and throughout the world, also has fuses. Some of you, like myself, have an older home and you have a mix of kind of circuit breakers and fuses. It's another type of protection device. And the advantage of having those devices throughout the system is, again, as I mentioned earlier, if you have a tree fall in, you have that device operate to protect the rest of the distribution system. That particular area is then out of power, and the remaining customers remain in power. There are 3 main components to EPSS. The one that is, I think, perhaps best known is the faster fault detection and operation. That's where a device like we see here, when it senses a fault on the system, it opens like a circuit breaker would trip in your home. And that, again, protects the rest of the distribution system. And also importantly, it mitigates the potential of an ignition, of arcing or sparking. And the advantage of having that device operate or trip fast is that it both, of course, shuts off power quickly, but it also sends less fault energy to that location. So whatever arcing and sparking you get is lessened. So you see these 2 down arrows. In 2022, a year where we saw about 30% greater fire risk throughout the year, We saw a 68% reduction in CPUC reportable ignitions on primary distribution conductor. That's a huge reduction in a increased risk year. And then also importantly, we saw a 99% reduction in fire size if there was an ignition. And so that second arrow is really about if you get arcing or sparking with EPSS, you get much, much less and much less likely that that fire will be able to propagate, allow agencies to respond more quickly. There's two other elements. So I touched on fuses. In winter, or when fire risk is much lower, fuses are helpful because they isolate an outage to a smaller area if it occurs. The problem can be if you have a higher fire risk is if a tree goes through just one of the conductors and depending on how it falls, you might have that one fuse operate, but no other devices operate. And then you still have power flowing through the conductor that's in the air, back through a transformer and what's referred to as a backfeed condition into a wire down that could cause an ignition or public safety risk. So by design, we have the line reclosers programmed to overreach those fuses. That's good from the perspective of you largely mitigate that wire down backfeed condition, but it does mean you'll have, depending on the fault location, more customers out of power, as we've seen with some of the outages in the area. And then lastly, an area that we started with what we call sensitive ground fault detection. So there's a type of fault that occurs, a big tree through a line, lots of arcing, low impedance or high current fault. Those are easier for devices like the one we see here to detect and operate. There's another kind of fault that we refer to as high impedance or low current that to traditional protection devices looks a lot like load coming on the system, an ag pump and air conditioners, that kind of thing. And so it historically has been very difficult to detect that kind of fault and trip reliably without kind of tripping all the time because an ag pump came on or something like that. And we've been working with a manufacturer who's developed an algorithm that's very effective at detecting these higher impedance or lower current faults and more reliably tripping. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of slides. We're seeing some nuisance trips, which is what we've seen, and we've been able to make some adjustments such that we're seeing less of that in the area. When a fault occurs, and this is really whether it's an EPSS outage or any other unplanned outage, a member of Joe's team, typically a troubleman, will be dispatched to the area and will, if there's what's referred to as a hazard tag, so a customer's called in, hey, tree went through a bunch of lines, as we saw in the Monterey 1113 today, that allows the troubleman to identify where they should go first, assess whether or not the system is safe to be restored, or isolate the damage. So in some cases, we're able to isolate down to a smaller number of customers and then repair, as in the case today, the wire down. Important thing to note here, and I'll speak to sort of PSPS or public safety power shutoff and EPSS notifications in a moment. Any of these unplanned outages, because it's unplanned and is in reaction to a fault condition occurring, we can't notify in advance. We don't know when the tree is going to fall, but we do send out a notification after the outage occurs. And then throughout the stages of the process, as you'll see here, including an initial estimated time of restoration, which is based on kind of historical outage activity. That's this automatically generated ETOR, estimated time of restoration. And then as we have coworkers in the field identifying the particular patrol that's required or the particular repairs that are required, we will update that estimated time of restoration. And each time that ETOR or estimated time of restoration is updated, a notification is sent to customers so that they have the latest. And then a power restoration notification is sent. And that's important because if something's happened at your home, for example, the main breaker tripped or something like that, we want customers to know that power has been restored in the area. And if they don't have power, we want them to call in. We also have information that's available on the website. And I should say the website overall is going through a pretty significant update and upgrade to make it more accessible and easier to use. And you should anticipate seeing some pretty significant changes over the next, say, 6 to 12 months. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so I touched on EPSS. And again, the main point of the difference here that I'd like to highlight is relative to notifications. And that's with a public safety power shutoff. That's where we see a forecasted severe weather That's where we're going to shut off the power proactively. That's a tool of last resort, but we will notify customers in advance through a number of means, automated calls, texts, and emails leading up to the potential event. And then as we go through what we refer to as the all clear, the weather all clear, patrol, and restore. EPSS, again, being an unplanned outage, is one where we can't pre-notify, but we will send these automatic notifications as we will with any other unplanned outage. Another point to highlight here, the when is important. So for EPSS, we have we don't just turn it on for fire season. One of the improvements we made as we rolled the program out more fully in 2021 was to forecast wildfire risk on a per circuit basis every day. So as we start to see wildfire risk elevate on particular circuits, our distribution control center operators go through a multi-step process to enable EPSS settings. And then if we say have a midsummer sort of a rainstorm or something like that, we have the ability to then disable those settings. So when we get to the reliability slides in a moment, you'll see that not all of the outages we've experienced on the Monorio 11, 11, and 1113 were EPSS. And that is part of this effort to ensure that we are enabled to mitigate wildfire risk when we need to, and then we are able to disable and provide some improved reliability benefits when it's safer to do so. Let's go to the next slide. All right. So between June 1st and September 30th, this is on two circuits, the Monorio 11, 11, and 1113, and we'll go to a slide that details where those are in just a moment. We've seen 22 outages, of which slightly more than half of those were non-EPSS. So this is typically going to be during that time where we have EPSS disabled. And then those that occurred while EPSS was enabled. I'll start with the purple. Well, I'll finish with the purple area. So green is vegetation. You see in this area, not surprisingly, we see a fair number of vegetation-caused outages. On the left side, you'll see we've had some equipment failures. Third party is most typically what we refer to as a car pole or someone crashing into a pole with their car. And then purple is unknown or undetermined. And on a distribution system, you'll typically see something like 17, 25, maybe as high as 30% on a typical distribution circuit. There's just some fault conditions that are very, very hard to find. Say, for example, a branch hitting the wires, causing them to slap together, causing a device to operate. But by the time we're on scene, everything's safe, everything's in the air. The tree branch is amongst many other tree branches. And so some amount of unknown cause outages is to be expected, not 60%, which is what you see on the side of EPSS. Most of those undetermined outages, we can't officially change the cause to what we would refer to as company initiated or essentially nuisance tripping. That most of those outages were associated with the rollout of this down conductor algorithm. We did some very deep forensic analysis, made some adjustments to that DCD setting, and we haven't seen a recurrence of those unknown causes. One thing important to note, during this time, we did, however, catch a vegetation-caused outage that likely would have caused an ignition were it not for DCD. So the reason we're rolling that out is to mitigate those types of outages, and we're seeing some good success, including on the Monorio 1113 and a couple of other circuits in Sonoma. So we're continuing to work on refining that to ensure we get the protection we need to without causing these nuisance trips and customers to be out of power unnecessarily. The last thing I want to touch on, and then the next slide will go into a little bit more tabular detail. We can do that now. So you see on the Monorio 1111, EPSS, not EPSS, about the same number of customers impacted and exactly the same number of outages. In fact, slightly more customers on Monorio 1111 and nearly twice as long duration of the outage. Now that can be a number of reasons. For example, a complicated car pole repair is going to take more time than, for example, a simpler removing a branch from a line. On the Monorio 1113, importantly here, this is where we've seen a number of these nuisance trips. That's a lot of customers at risk of stating the obvious with EPSS. Many fewer on average but more numerous. And again, I do want to point out this is unplanned outages only that we're focused on here. Couple things to note. relative to EPSS outages specifically. We have a number of key performance metrics that we're focused on. First is a 60-minute response metric, meaning that we want to get one of Joe's folks on site or a standby resource within 60 minutes. And the reason for that is first and foremost to ensure that we don't have an ignition. So when we have EPSS enabled, that indicates that wildfire risk is higher. We want a resource on site as soon as possible, as soon as safely possible, to ensure that there is not an ignition. And we're performing very well there system-wide. We're, I believe, north of 92%. And when we miss, we typically miss by a few minutes. That's a really important metric for us. The secondary advantage of that is once we have one of Joe's qualified electrical workers on site, he or she is able to start patrolling much sooner, which means that we can likely get those customers restored sooner. So the primary purpose of that metric is really to drive insurance that we don't have an ignition, but it does have a secondary benefit of being able to patrol and restore sooner. So that's part of why you see some of this improved performance relative to outage duration as we get someone on site, able to patrol, able to restore. The next is CAIDI, or Customer Average Interruption Duration Index. Yet another acronym. It's an industry standard to measure how long customers are out of power. And the reason we don't just say how long was the outage is because for most outages, especially larger outages, we step restore. So that means that for a 2,000 customer outage, we're usually able to get out there, patrol an area, say it's safe, energize that area, then the next area, then the next area, then the next area. And so the Customer Average Interruption Duration Index is that representation of the average time customers are out of power. For most outages, that means some customers are out less, some customers may be out right around the number, and some might be out longer. And then the third metric we're focused on is ETOR, or estimated time of restoration accuracy. That's important because customers want the lights on. If they go off, they want them back on as quickly as possible, and they want to know when they're coming back on. So we're really focused on improving our ETOR accuracy and ensuring that we're giving good information to customers about when they can expect the lights to come back on. Each and every EPSS outage is reviewed the next day by a cross-functional team. Joe's on those calls, I'm on those calls, members of my team, members of our engineering team, and we review each and every outage for those key metrics to ensure that we are meeting those metrics. If we have a variance, we understand why, make some corrective actions. And then we also take a look at where we might have seen repeat device operations, and that will spur an escalated review, an engineering review, escalated actions in the field to ensure that we're able to prevent recurrence to the extent possible. So we do that every day, pretty much year round, up until we're seeing EPSS largely disabled or we're in normal settings. And that's something we instituted actually last year. We saw some really good pickup on these metrics and some obviously heightened attention. And we plan to continue to do that and perhaps expand it to some additional larger outages as well, since we've seen some really good benefits from doing that. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we've seen obviously the MAC area, I'll call it, before. The lighter green area is the Monorio 1113 that we were speaking to. The blue area is Monorio 1111. And the substation is right in Monorio, where you might expect a circuit called the Monorio. So just briefly, a little bit of kind of inside baseball. Our substations are often named for either a town or a local feature. And then the first two numbers there typically refer to the voltage. So our distribution voltages are typically 12 or 24 kilovolts, sometimes 4. It's 11.7, which is why it's 11 instead of 12. But the first two numbers are the voltage, the primary distribution voltage, and then the second two reference the bank and feeder, particular distribution feeder that comes off. So a little bit of a peek behind the curtain about how we talk about our circuits. And then a few things that I want to highlight that we've been doing on these circuits to help improve. The first is relative to installing additional fault indicators. So fault indicators are a fairly simple device that sit on the distribution conductor. They look pretty small from down on the ground. They're actually about this size. And they, when a fault is detected, they start to flash. And that allows, when those are strategically placed, that allows our trouble men and women to identify where the fault location is and narrow down both the zone of patrol, which means they can restore faster. It also helps them narrow in where there might be a problem and identify potential fixes for longer term mitigations. I also referenced the engineering, the settings adjustments that we've made that have been successful thus far. And then any one of these outages that is a vegetation caused outages, again, David and his team respond to that within a few days. We clear the hazard first, and then there's a follow-up patrol to clear the hazard same day, but the follow-up patrol is shortly after that. And then we have a goal of getting that work all complete within a month. Encourage you to check out our website on EPSS. There's a really impressive video that highlights some of our advanced technology services engineers and some of the testing they've done. And it demonstrates really quite clearly kind of why this technology works. So encourage you to check that out if you haven't before. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, I'm going to close on some customer resources. I think we have some flyers. Okay, flyers are at the door. Number of resources available for customers. Some of these, like portable batteries, are really focused on medical baseline customers and those who are self-identified vulnerable, but we've expanded access to that program in 2023. The generator and battery rebate program similarly expanded access for more customers. The SGIP, or Self-Generation Incentive Program, is actually a program that's been around for many years for things like solar and now batteries. Importantly, for customers who are on electric well water, there are additional incentives available for kind of whole home solutions, including battery backup. The disability disaster access resources, again, for customers who need those resources. And then fixed power solutions is a permanent long-term backup power solution. We are starting small with that program and looking to expand in 2024 and beyond. Next slide, I think, is a few website resources. If you're not already familiar, I encourage you to check them out. Our partnership with 211, we're very proud of. That's available to any customer, any resident who needs additional support. And then at the top, I referenced the Safety Action Center. Great resources there for personal preparedness and planning. And then our reported app, again, if you're not familiar with that, I encourage you to check it out. And that allows any customer who lives in a high fire risk area to report to us something they see. Non-emergency condition. Emergency conditions should be reported to 911 and called in immediately. With that, thank you for your time and happy to take questions. And I'm happy to come over if that was.
Council, and then we'll move to the audience. I do have a couple of questions. There was a slide about what customers can expect on vegetation management and what happens and the steps that PG&E takes to do things. And it specifically talked about residential. It was focused in a residential way.
Okay.
Oh, sure. The slide on what to expect, it talked about it was going to inform the residential customer, and there was a bunch of steps from it. I'm wondering, is there a different process if it's not residential? The reason I bring this up is that there is a property in Rio Neto that's actually owned by Russian River Rec and Park, and a whole bunch of trees got cleared. Russian River Rec and Park was never informed that was going to happen. The community didn't know it was going to happen. And people kept asking, and I'm like, I don't know. And I called someone at county because it could have been the county doing something, and it wasn't. It ended up being PG&E.
Okay.
So they weren't informed. And then after the work was done, all the stuff was just left there. Called PG&E. PG&E basically said, call the contractor because they're responsible for doing it. So I'm wondering, is your process different for residents versus if it's owned by, in this case, a special district or a nonprofit or something like that?
Yeah, so say a couple things. The first is that if this isn't resolved, I'd like to take a follow-up so that we can resolve it. Is it resolved or not yet?
It's been cleared now, so.
Including the
debris.
The debris. Okay, good. Maybe we can chat a little bit after. I'd like that's a little bit too much of a bouncing ball from my perspective. I at a high level notification, whether it's a residential customer, a Parks District, a winery, there should be notification in advance. One of the things that we're doing, in fact, beyond that, especially for kind of either a larger customer, special district, where we have a lot of infrastructure, is a bundling process to make sure that we're minimizing the number of times we're on that property, so that we're not showing up today with a vegetation inspection, next week with a distribution inspection, then we're coming back for pull, test, and treat. Right? It's a source of annoyance for customers of all types, but especially those larger landowners, whether they be a larger residential landowner or a commercial property or a park and special district. So I would like to follow up on this. Sure. We shouldn't be, regardless of who the customer is, just showing up and doing stuff without notification. And typically parks and special
Maybe you
districts.
put some on a redwood.
What does the notification look like? What happens? How do you get notified?
David, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of the process for notification?
Yeah. Come closer, please. Or in your case, you might want to use the microphone.
So yeah, typically, when it comes to notification, residential, there's 3 different ways that an inspector might notify, and that's going to be a knock at the door, phone call, or we have these door hangers that we sometimes use. Yeah, some of you may have seen those before. It gets a little tricky sometimes with agencies of any sort, but a notification is usually sent out to that agency. So I'd like to talk to you about that a little bit too after this. Maybe we can check into that, because there should have been some sort of notification sent.
Okay. Yeah, the most typical with like a larger entity is we have like a sale contact or something like that, but yeah, we'll follow up and make sure we understand where the miss was there.
I think some of the things I've seen is that, just to follow up on what Pip's saying, is that often there are neighborhoods where people don't live there full time, right? And so that's why I'm asking, like, how are you notifying? And if you're making a phone call, is it a phone call to a landline that's at that house that they don't live in all the time?
Right.
And then you're and I have seen the things that they hang, and I just pick them up for my neighbors and then I call them or text them. But it seems to me if they're customers or viewers, there should be other ways for you to notify.
Or is there confirmation that a discussion has been had before the work happens?
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yes, I think there's 2, you can keep me honest here, but right, if the tree is on the customer's property is going to be different than if it's not, right? So there may be a little bit of both of those things going on, but agree, if it's on a customer's property, there should be engagement, right? Yeah, I hear you.
We'll follow up on
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
my follow-up is on Woodhall, and many cases felled wood is being left on site, which increases the fuel load. It impairs access and egress and compromises carefully constructed defensible space parameters. It's also come to light that EVM was discontinued in late 2022, as you mentioned, and replaced with new programs. It's vital to ensure that Woodhall is explicitly and consistently integrated within all utility vegetation management programs. I mean, leaving large hunks of wood when folks are working on defensible space is just not appropriate.
I also want to add to that, because out here we have people who go in and get that wood because they use it for firewood and they sell it for firewood. And they are taking some serious risks when you leave it down in canyons and things like that. So there are people, I mean, maybe it's a notice of just, we're going to be leaving these logs, or leave them someplace on the side of the road that people can remove them easily, because it's scavenging for firewood is huge out here, because it's how a lot of people keep their homes. So not leaving it would be a benefit, not only for fire risk, but also for the scavengers, or putting it in a place that's accessible. They have talked about the size of the wood that you leave. That makes it difficult for them to remove, and they want to remove it for all those reasons. So maybe talking to some of the, I don't know if it's scavengers you would talk to, or the firewood companies who get their firewood from tree services. So they're already working out arrangements of how to get wood. Nobody cuts down trees anymore for firewood. It's all that's done, all the firewood is coming from trimmed trees,
Mhm.
one way or another. So somehow come up with a system to remove that wood where you're more responsible for it and people aren't scavenging it.
Yeah, I like that suggestion, engaging with firewood companies I'd appreciate that suggestion.
Okay.
So up Villa Road, up Champs-Élysées in Forestville, I was talking to a former neighbor and elderly couple, not a lot of money, huge, but still way beyond what they or anybody they know could handle. And I know that that's efficient. But it's hard to see those folks put in a position where they lost their parking spots. Parking spots are very precious up in some of these one-lane roads up in the hills. So that was something that felt unfair, to those of us around. And one other thing, and most of this is contract, is that correct?
Correct.
And one other question I have, because I get so thrilled when I see PG&E ads when they're undergrounding.
Yeah.
And as expensive, hugely expensive as that is,
Mhm.
obviously, this constant vegetation management is not, it's pretty price to pay as well. But I was told that I was being naive and only about 8%, that PG&E is only doing around 8% of undergrounding. And it sounds like that's not true. I was misinformed with that.
Yeah, so let me try to speak to that question, see if I get it, right? So over the course of the next 7 years is the timeline we're anticipating, planning to do this 10,000 miles, which is 10,000 miles of the 25,000 system wide. That's going to vary county to county based on, that's being done primarily based on buying down wildfire risk from primary distribution system. And so that will vary from county to county. I'm not familiar with the 8% number. I would need to follow up on that. That may be sort of what's been done and planned. The plan right now really goes out only as far as 2025, really 2026 from a sort of initial scoping perspective. So the full scope of the program has not been planned. Part of that is based on sort of as we learn how to do this more efficiently. And as we update our models relative to wildfire risk, we want to make sure that we, don't stick to a plan that we developed this year and we learn something about, our wildfire risk model now includes things like egress, where it didn't before, which is a significant concern, obviously, around here in certain places. So we can maybe take a follow-up if you know where you got the 8% from, we can try to reconcile that. But I think part of the gap there may just be in terms of what we've done, what we have planned, and then the longer term plan, which has not been specific relative to location and that kind of thing.
Which looks like it takes a lot of planning.
Yes.
I think I read the 8% thing or some very small percent thing in the Press Democrat.
Okay, that's helpful. We'll run that down and see if we can
And
understand.
there were
where
a
that
lot of
came
people
from.
complaining about that.
Sure. Yeah, no, I know there've been concerns in Sonoma County relative to, what's been done, which is about 5 miles. We've got another 5 miles planned. And then another couple miles after that. Obviously, there's many more miles in Sonoma County. I know there's been some concerns relative to Napa. So helpful to know that you think that figure came from Press Democrat. We can certainly.
Some tiny figure came from the Press.
Yeah,
Democrat.
okay.
Well, are you focused on areas that are fire prone to do this? Or are you doing it in cities and things like that? I mean,
No.
what's the?
No,
There
yes,
has to be
it
some
is a
priority.
wildfire risk driven plan. It is not being done in any urban environment.
Okay.
My question is, why did Tulare County get 27 miles of undergrounding and Sonoma County, which is a high fire threat area, get 5?
5 miles is nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's along Marquez, which is a
High fire.
a high fire area, but we're never going to see undergrounding in West County on Cazadero Highway, what have you. What we need to do is follow the lead of Southern California Edison and install tree wire or insulated conductors on your primaries and your secondaries. And that would save a heck of a lot of money. What they're saying right now, Kurt is proposing that we could be saving $4 billion.
So we are doing some overhead hardening. It does not reduce the wildfire risk to nearly the extent that undergrounding does. And from a kind of 30-year time horizon
Right.
isn't necessarily less expensive, especially when you account for the fact that you're leaving a gap on wildfire risk.
Can you
Well, the
explain
other,
what
the other,
that means?
is a-
Let's do.
is my
one at a
my
time.
follow-up on that would be on ground level primary distribution.
Yeah.
And what that basically is doing, rather than undergrounding, you're laying the primaries on the ground in conduit. So you're not excavating and creating all that additional cost.
Yeah.
And you can reduce the cost substantially. This is done in Southeast Asia, all over Southeast Asia. It's done all over Europe. And I understand that PG&E is running a test in Santa Cruz County in the mountains. I don't know how many miles they're doing. Perhaps you can shed some light on that.
Yeah, we've just started that pilot. I think actually construction has just kicked off, and they've run into some challenges right off the bat. So it is something that has shown certainly, you know, it's been effective in other areas internationally. It's something we're absolutely interested in exploring and testing from a constructability and kind of long-term perspective. Want to make sure we understand, you know, all the benefits and challenges with it, but it certainly shows some promise.
Well, PG, a former PG&E employee has the patent for it. So obviously there's some skin in the game there.
I'm just gonna, this is a kind of a follow-up to
Yep.
all of it.
Okay.
I really appreciate what PG&E is doing with all of the steps you're taking and trying to shorten duration or whatever, but I think out here, we see so many power outages that affect so many different things you don't even think about sometimes. A lot of us don't have Wi-Fi in the right place, so we rely on using our internet connection to do internet calling, and the frequency of that not only causes us a high inconvenience, but if there was a real emergency, it becomes a real dangerous situation. The stuff you're doing is great, but when are we gonna see a fix to the source of the problem, which is like a faulty system that's delivering electricity? To Mike's point on undergrounding, or if it's I don't know all about that stuff, but I think people appreciate the stuff you're doing, but people want to figure out how are you going to actually solve the real problem, not how are you going to mitigate risk on a faulty system.
Yeah, so I think, you know, some of the steps we're taking now are getting, so what I hear you saying is here that you're working on it, but we're still seeing outages, and what we want is to stop the outages, right? Which is ultimately.
And to be safe.
Yeah, yeah. So we share that both from a, you know, reducing outages, you know, main part of our charter is delivering reliable power, right? The other is keeping you safe. Both of those things can be done together. In fact, reducing outages is good because you maintain your power. It also reduces wildfire risk. So any one of these trees in the line can create a arc or a spark, which is why we've installed EPSS. That is why we're focused both in the immediate term. I mentioned these daily reviews to make sure we're addressing the immediate cause, and then the longer term kind of hardening the system, if you will, or making it more resilient is going to take more time, and that's why we've done some things on the customer side to expand, like whole home batteries and some other things that might help with things like well water, Wi-Fi, that kind of thing.
As far as the SCHIP program.
Yeah, so SGIP and the equity resiliency kind of adder that's available for well water customers is one of those. This fixed power solutions program that we started small is where we're looking to kind of support installation of whole home batteries. We're looking to expand that next year, a couple of fold. So yeah, I'm talking about those programs that are more of a whole home solution versus something like a portable battery solution, which is okay for a customer that might need something for a medical device, but isn't going to address kind of the more whole home needs.
Cynthia.
Well, I guess what I'd like to ask about, I guess simply put, is why are you thinking in terms of undergrounding rather than simply insulating the wires? And my understanding is that undergrounding is, as Mike said, very, very expensive, but it also takes a long time. I mean, you're talking 7 years. Well, we've been lucky for the last couple of years. We haven't had a major fire, so knock on wood, but you know, if we could insulate, I mean, in Southern California, I think they're going to be 75% through with their wires by the end of 24. Okay, and you're saying 7 years to get 5 miles of undergrounded wire? That doesn't seem safe. Oh, not for every place, but for us. And so what I think of that is, I mean, it's like the longer it takes, the less safe it is, just in terms of playing the odds. Plus, I think, and that everybody knows I talk too much. Like I was telling you before, okay, I live on a hill, and just above me, there's a big swath of cut trees with big wires going, and then it's over an extraordinarily deep canyon with, of course, a stream at the bottom of it. So it's like, if you were to try to underground those wires, I mean, you know, you're really talking about cutting down a lot of trees, and these are really, you know, the trees look so eternal and all that, but they're really very vulnerable hillsides. And every time you do that sort of thing, it's just an invitation to erosion. And all erosion goes into the streams, and it screws up our river and our fish. And you know, we are, many folks really enjoy the recreational part of our communities, and so they don't want a muddy river, you know. So none of that, you know, seems good to me. And plus I think that also goes back to length of time, because if you're talking about doing stuff like that, you're also talking about having to have a lot of environmental permits. And, you know, as Linda was saying earlier about getting our bridges fixed, I mean, we've really got to pay attention to the environmental permits to get a bridge, much less to get all this other stuff done. And so that could hold you up for a long time. And then to end up with,
Hey, Cynthia?
you've got the primary lines buried, but not the poles, and some of the secondaries, but not all of them, none of the service lines. So if a wildfire comes, it's going to burn all that stuff down anyway.
Hey, Cynthia, I was just wondering, we are running out of time. We have to get to the audience, but what's your question exactly?
So my question is, why are you undergrounding instead of insulating?
Yeah, I'll say a couple things. So one, I just wanted to make sure to speak directly to 5 miles, 7 years. 7 years is really the kind of the duration of the whole program. The 5 miles I referenced is already done, and we have another 5 miles to go, and then there's additional. So I just didn't want to leave the impression that we're only doing 5 miles in the next 7 years. I'd say this. I'd say from a permanent wildfire reduction perspective, undergrounding is much more effective than covered conductor. And covered conductor, depending on where you're at, can take some time too, and may require pole replacements. So it seems like you might just be able to kind of get it up quickly, and Edison's been at this for a while and has made some good progress. We just don't believe that over the long run, both from a wildfire risk perspective and a cost perspective, that's the right way to go with most of the areas.
Even if you did continue with vegetation management, because you know, got to assume you're going to continue with that.
Let me make sure I understand the question for the covered conductor.
Yeah, I'm saying if you put those two together, put two mitigations together, would that not be
the issue
as safe?
Yeah, the issue is that a large tree stem failure can bring down covered conductor, multiple poles, and you can still have an ignition. It's safer than bare wire, certainly. But with EPSS in place, we feel really confident that we've made a good first kind of nearer term step. And then the next piece of this is going to be hardening in some areas overhead. Not saying we're moving away from that, but that for the kind of the larger system, the undergrounding really is gonna most significantly reduce the wildfire risk, and in the long run, from an operations and maintenance and vegetation perspective, is gonna be more cost effective.
Okay, the last question from the council. That's
Vegetation management question.
Yes.
There are large swaths of land that is completely cleared underneath the main power lines. It's maybe 30, 50 feet wide, and it goes through huge areas. It's being invaded by Scotch broom,
Okay.
and Scotch broom is highly invasive, so then it spreads.
Yep.
And it's also catches fire very, very easily.
Yep.
So when these areas are not maintained, you are increasing the fire risk right in your cleared lanes. The last time I asked, they said they would not remove, PG&E would not remove the Scotch broom until it got within the 4 to 8 feet of the wires. It never gets that tall. In the meantime, it has now become dense and extremely dangerous and invades all the areas around it. Is there any plan to remove the Scotch broom?
So when I hear 30 to 50 feet, that sounds like a transmission.
It is, it's transmission lines that go through Forestville, they go
Yeah.
from your substation and they go down River Road and go through Forestville, and there's these huge swaths. And they're literally have 10, 12 feet of Scotch broom all over them.
Gotcha.
Dangerous.
Let me take a follow-up on that. I hear your concern and understand it. And I'm gonna need to follow up with our transmission vegetation management folks to understand what our plan is there. Because I hear your concern and appreciate it.
I can show you pictures too, if you need
Yeah.
to have those. Okay.
Thank you.
all right, last one.
I just have a really quick
Sure.
question. I could not help but notice on your map with the little purple icons,
Yes.
the little purple icons were all in Forestville. Are you intending to move west? Because I will tell you that when my power goes out, I'm on a little grid in my neighborhood with like 10 houses. But then the lines go up over Neely Hill into Maze Canyon, and the power goes out all the way down Pocket Canyon and Maze Canyon.
Those are the sectionalizing.
So the
Sectionalizing,
sectionalizing,
yes.
so do you intend to sectionalize further west?
Yes, is the short answer. We did have that one device that were all in Forestville, but I take your point that they were kind of largely clustered there. The sectionalizing devices we've been using to date are largely line reclosers, so that's a bit more of a complicated device. We were working with a couple of manufacturers on the simpler, lower profile fuse saver devices. The importance there is that they gang trip, so all three things operate at the same time. That is going to allow us to do many more of those. In terms of the specific plan for West County, we'll have to take that back. I don't happen to have it with me. We do have a couple in plan. The longer term plan, I'll have to circle back with you on.
Mike, just one quick question. Dave.
Sure.
And that, it goes back to 2021 in January, a car hit a pole in Forestville.
Okay.
And we had 12,000 ratepayers out for nearly 24 hours. And I'm wondering, and that included Guerneville, Monterey, Forestville, Rio Neato, Jenner, Bodega. I mean, the whole county went dark. West County went dark because of one pole. And I'm wondering what type of redundancy is being planned so that we don't have a repeat of this situation.
I called Joe over because I imagine he'll remember that particular.
I bet he does.
Fun day. Thank you for the question.
Yep.
And that pole was just off Covey Road.
That's
down the
correct.
Bottom.
Right.
It had a transmission on the top of the distribution undergrowth. So when the truck went through it, the transmission dropped into
Right.
the underbuilt, and we had to clean up some meters all over the places that had some problems that went all the way out to the coast as it went through several substations as that fault went through there. And so
Correct.
I can't speak to what the substation folks were doing. We were looking at the distribution side of that and making sure that we were getting that cleaned up and getting the transmission lines back up. But you're absolutely right. When bringing that back in, because it went almost all the way out to Salmon Creek, and bringing it back in through this sub, the Mirabelle sub,
Right.
all of those subs, it kind of had a trickle effect on it. And so what they look at after that is, why did that happen? And I don't have an answer for you at that, but we can certainly dig into it
Yeah.
and get.
All we're asking for is redundancy.
But a lot of times what we look at, and Dave brought it up when he talked about when we have an outage and we look at how the open points between, the Monterey circuits going down Boho Highway and hooking into the Molino 1102 circuits and the 1103 circuits that come out into Forestville and things like that. How do we move load back and forth between those so we can continue to isolate what an outage is? And so we can continue to drive that down. And those are sort of the inter-network of the distribution grid. So that's provides our redundancy, if you will, pulling those different distribution grids together. When it came to that transmission grid, well, I'll have to get some information from you. I don't handle transmission.
Thank you.
But we can get that to you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Good, thanks. Anyone in the audience here have any questions or comments? Yeah. Would you mind do we want the microphone over here or up to the owl?
Thank you. I just have a two-part question. Okay. I think it's right. Okay. One is there a percentage of contracts granted to local contractors to keep the money for maintenance, to keep the money in the community with tree workers who know the community, know the trees and know the roads?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I appreciate that because that is something we're working towards. So I'll give this here as an example. We actually brought in Atlas, so Kingsborough Atlas, and they are a local
Santa Rosa
tree company. So that is, I would say, our first step to bringing it in local. I will say a lot of our tree crews already were folks that live in the area, as well as our inspectors, but it's definitely something we see. Sometimes we do bring in folks from out of the area to help us out, especially if we're falling behind. And obviously that can lead to a lot of confusion and quality issues. So yes, we are working on that.
It's an effort. Okay.
Yes.
Speaking of quality issues, as a second part of my question, so who sets the standards for what it's basically supposed to look like in the end? Because what we know is that there's a 4-foot clearance that has to be cleared, but there's not often consideration made to the species of the tree from what we see, the species of the tree, how quickly that tree will grow back. Like, for example, bay trees, they grow super fast, so they'll be coming right back up into the lines. And it sometimes often looks like just a lop job. And I wonder if there's any, I don't want to speak from the aesthetic point of view, but we love our trees here. And so is there any consideration made in like, you know what, in 2 more years, this is going to be a problem. So why don't we just take the branch down from the bottom, or why don't we nurture this in a different way instead of just kind of that clear cut look that on River Road, there was one last year, and on my road, I saw just sort of this tunnel of clearing.
Yeah, no, that's very fair. And
Could we just take all public comment and then do the answers, because we have a timer and then we have people waiting online too.
Yeah, okay.
So we're gonna ask your
I'll
question
chat with
and then take notes, and then we can answer all the questions at once.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah. Tracy?
Yes, we have Donovan online. Donovan, please unmute to speak.
Yeah, hello, thank you. I have 2 questions. My first one is about the undergrounding and the percentage associated with undergrounding. What part of that is new construction as opposed to converting existing lines? Is that factored into undergrounding as a whole? I know.
And Donovan, they'll be answering all questions at the end.
Okay, cool. And then, sorry. My second question is, well, I don't know if it's so much of a question of a comment. I'm just curious about the opportunity cost associated with undergrounding and what we're doing now, because it seems like if we're looking at the finance of it, we're having these meetings, PG&E is going through lawsuits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and it's ongoing, and that's up until now. And I don't know how much that's cost, but is there some sort of cost analysis associated with actually doing it right? And getting it done quickly, as opposed to the amount of funds that will be spent to sort of cover your ass along the way? Excuse my language. So those are my two questions.
Thank you. If anyone else online wishes to speak, please raise your hand. I'm not seeing any additional hands.
All right, so thanks for the questions. I think we'll have a follow-up conversation when we wrap here. You and David can chat. Donovan, thank you for those two questions. To the first one, as I understood it, you were asking about, are we kind of building new infrastructure or line extensions, that kind of thing? The answer to that is no. Generally, we are taking overhead and putting it underground. In many cases, when we are building out line extensions, that kind of thing in high fire risk areas, we will, to the extent possible, underground it. But the program is really focused on taking existing overhead and reducing that risk by putting it underground. I think to your second question, what I'd say is kind of twofold. I've mentioned a couple of times that in the long run, we believe undergrounding to be significantly less expensive. That accounts for the buy down of wildfire risk, as well as reduced operations, maintenance, vegetation management. But these layers of protection I touched on in the meantime have reduced wildfire risk since 2017 by 90%. And by the end of this year, we believe we'll be at 94%. So we've taken a huge bite out of that apple, and we're looking to keep going. So the in the meantime answer is these layers of protection that we've installed and are looking to improve. So thanks for both of those questions. Appreciate them.
Thank you guys so much. You can tell we're concerned a little.
Thanks for having us. We'll be hanging around afterwards.
Okay, we're gonna move to if there are any public comments on anything that was not on the agenda, you want to ask us questions, or we'll bring up an issue for us to look at. Now's the time to do that. Anybody here? So everything's great.
Yeah.
Anyone in Zoom?
If you'd like to make a comment on items not on the agenda, please raise your hand. I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Okay, let's move to committee reports. Cleanup and ad hoc. Cleanup and ad hoc. The cleanup ad hoc.
Okay, so I think it was, I thank you, Betsy. Betsy covered a lot of what we've been talking about in the last couple of meetings. The last meeting that we had was in end of September, the 28th. And we invited Betsy, and we had Carol Schumate from River Keepers there. And we just wanted to offer our help because we've done these cleanups before, in making sure that the community is presented in, a really nice way when the parade goes through. And then making sure that whatever garbage is generated vis-a-vis the parade gets picked up, and then having the cleanup of Johnson's Beach after the party, which I think is really important. In addition to that, just so you know, we will have a MAC booth at the Johnson's Beach area where the fun will happen, and we'll be there ready to talk to people.
So that is the thing to do during Gay Pride. Go to the MAC table.
In the chair. Oh, the booth?
No. Joe, did you ask me?
Oh, no, I think we volunteered. That
Well,
was on the agenda.
I did, but it's not on here. So.
Yes, it is.
Do we have an update from communications?
Yeah, it's next.
Okay. It say me?
It does.
Why
You're
did you do
here.
that?
Okay, let's hear from the communications ad hoc.
So what we have on our agenda for the weekend is that we are having a booth at the Pride Festival after the parade. And we would love to have people come and do 2-hour stints, talking to our community for an hour. So from 1 to 5 p.m. And then you can help us pick up trash afterwards. Because it's gonna be all hands on deck. So just so you know, it's so wonderful to engage with our community, to have people come and talk to us. And pretty much it's been Joe and Vicky and Patty and I think that's the
That's
answer. People, there are people that don't know what we do or who we are or anything about us. There are people that have concerns that they bring to us. And we sign up people for the mailing list. So we're constantly adding.
And we recruit for our replacements.
Yeah, we do that as well. We do that as well. So, and then we send those concerns and email addresses and whatever to Debbie, and off they go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And
So
you'll be
come
having
join us on the
ballots
beach.
at your table?
Sorry,
You'll be having ballots for the election at your table?
that's a good idea.
Yes,
Yeah.
we will.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Good.
All right, with that, we are adjourned. Can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second,
I second.
everyone?
Aye.
Aye, aye, aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
For coming, appreciate it.
Yes.